I know that Jojo Ruba has got a very important announcement to make, and I would love him to come up here. While he is coming up here, I'll just say that my wife, Judy, and I met Jojo more than 20 years ago. And all that time, he has been a courageous warrior for Christian truth and a thorough professional as an apologist for the faith. And I think what you are going to say builds on that. Please have the mic.
And, you know, is the mic on, Alex? We're good? I think we should give Nigel a hand for being such a great MC as well today. I want you to know we're not the only ones participating. We actually have some images from our watch parties across Canada. Do we have those ready, gentlemen? So I asked them to text at the beginning. So these are different locations across Canada. This is in Edmonton. They're watching us. Okay, let's see the next one. This is at Grace Church. Now, I don't know which Grace because we have 3 Grace churches, so, but it's great that they're able to join us. Okay, let's see the next one. This is in Calgary. And apparently, last one, we had 50 people or so in a little town called, and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, Tulkwa, BC, near Smithers. You'll see the last picture there, guys. So and these represent all kinds of denominations and groups, and we're so excited to have all of you join us from Springdale, Newfoundland, all the way to Tulkwa, BC. So let's give those guys a hand as well. One of my favorite titles is A Pastor's Kid, and I grew up with the privilege as a pastor's kid of having a lot of my life in my Sunday morning sermons, good and bad. And it was a great honor to be part of a church, little church. In fact, my dad will be doing closing prayer today, so this is for you, Dad, because one of the best things about being a public speaker now is I can give him a bit of payback and share some of his stories when I preach and speak. So my dad loves evangelism. He loves to share the gospel, and he would often begin his sermon by saying something like this: if you were to die tonight, would you be ready to go to heaven? But sometimes he'd begin his sermon by saying, when you die, are you ready to go to heaven? Unfortunately, sometimes he confused the two, and he would say, when you die tonight, are you ready to go to heaven? And the question I would ask when he would say that is, how do you know this? And what are you going to do about it? And when we talk about religious persecution, sometimes that's what we're faced as well. Like, how do we know this is going to happen? And what are we going to do about it? And this key challenge, this question was what we wanted to raise with you today. Because as Canadians, we're very polite. We want to say thank you a lot. We even say sorry when we bump someone, we say sorry to them, right? That's who we are, and we're proud of that, and that's not a bad thing. But the challenge is when we're faced with the kinds of things we've just shown you and talked about, what is a biblical response? Now, thankfully, we actually had a young woman come to us named Corinne. She's somewhere here. I'm so glad for you, by the way. Thank you. Oh, there she is. There she is. And she came to us and she said, look, you're asking the wrong question. And when she showed us a set of slides that talked about where we actually are in Canada. And this is one of them, where she walked through the different stages of persecution. She called it spectrum of fear to courage, very well said. But you notice things like at the end there where people's lives are threatened, that's like North Korea. That's where Pastor Lim came to speak, right? Reputation and ridicule, well, we're used to that, but I think we're more than that now, aren't we? When we're in a situation where people are being fired for their faith or not being allowed to graduate, like at the University of Manitoba because they refuse to perform an abortion. And if you look at where the trajectory is, you notice it's a step-by-step approach. It happens in a slow manner. I was talking to someone who said, well, we're not being persecuted like we are in North Korea. And I said, well, no, but that's the trajectory of where we're going. and you notice that it's going one way. And it's not just us who recognize this. A Catholic cardinal said, "I expect to die in bed, my successor will die in prison, and his successor will die a martyr in the public square. His successor will pick up the shards of a ruined society and slowly help rebuild civilization as the church has done so often in human history." And I think Corinne really hit the point right. The question we should be asking is not, how do we fight religious persecution? The question is, how do we become Christians who thrive despite the persecution? What do we need to do to build a church that's prepared for this persecution, not wanting it, but understanding one key thing? If you go through church history, it isn't persecution that grows the church. It's what the church chooses to do despite the persecution that grows the church. And God will bless our faithfulness. Now, the good news is that we don't have to relearn all these lessons. We actually have a whole history of the church that we can learn from. Larry Hurtado, a Christian historian, wrote a book called Destroyer of the Gods. And it's a great book. I recommend it to you. He gives 3 recommendations. And in the time that I have, I want to go through these 3 recommendations because it's the same steps the early church did to survive in Jerusalem and all throughout the Middle East when they were being openly persecuted. The first thing he identified that the church was able to do was they could not deny the resurrection. Now think about it. If you actually met Jesus after he'd been crucified and you're eating with him, you can't deny the resurrection. If your grandma saw it and you trust her, you can't deny the resurrection, right? And in the same way, we have to understand this is God's reality. And the resurrection of God changes all of history. And if Christianity is merely a preference, something you like because it's your cultural beliefs, you're not going to survive. One of the groups that we have here, I would encourage you to visit them, is ARPA. You notice what they said about ARPA at the BC legislature and how they were so open-minded and wanting to welcome everybody. And in the name of welcoming everybody, they don't want ARPA to be there. And not one thought how contradictory that worldview is. One of the reasons why I love them is because they stand on truth. Do you know how influential they are in Ottawa here in the parliament? And they represent less than 100,000 Reformed Christians. They punch above their weight because they stand on truth and they organize themselves. And they've asked me, do you think we should bring in other Christians to join us? And I said, no, you should stick to representing your people. It's our responsibility to bring in everybody else. And that's what we want to challenge you to think about. It's our responsibility to step up, if this is the case, to stand for what is true. I love the principle that in Jeremiah talks about. What is the responsibility of believers in a pagan land? To seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. And what it's saying here is that Christians, unlike every other lobby group, are not just interested in our own self-interest. We actually care for the common good. Why? Because it's our responsibility to be salt and light for the gospel. And that means we want to share the truth because it's good for everybody. The second thing that the gospel teaches us, that the church history teaches us, is they modeled love that no one else could have. You know, we know that the early church rescued abandoned infants, right, in Roman times. Did you know in certain Roman provinces, it was actually a capital offense to rescue babies? And they still did it. That's how much they loved their neighbor. And the challenge we have been lots of great questions coming in about whether we should be involved in politics. I'm not asking you to be involved in politics. I'm asking you to love your neighbor. And if your neighbor is being killed against her will because her husband wants her to commit MAID, just like happened last month, then how can we as the church say we love our neighbor and let that happen using our own tax money as Canadians? You see my point? It isn't just a matter of having a political will. It's the matter of caring enough to do something about it. I'm going to be a little over just to let you know, okay, but thank you. If you had a fight with your spouse the night before, and you found this sandwich as you're going to work, would you eat it? How many of you would eat it? Anybody? Okay, one person. There's not a lot of faith in the spouses here. I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, but let me ask this question. How many of you would say you love your spouse? Okay, some of you, I'm really sorry for the rest of you didn't put up your hands. Hopefully we can work that out. Now, all of you who raised their hands who love their spouses, how many of you would say that you agree with everything your spouse says or does? Anybody? There's usually one husband who's usually sitting with his wife. Okay, no, okay, nobody. Why is that? Because we understand that love doesn't mean agreement. And we live in a culture, we actually got a question about that, where they prioritize the definition of love as agreement. Biblical love doesn't do that. In fact, true love doesn't focus on making you feel good, but focuses on helping you be good. In fact, Christian love seeks to make you more like Christ, and we need a ministry, an organization that will provide that kind of love. So for example, in order to prepare for persecution, we need to be able to support those who are fired for their jobs. I worked for the CRTC, so I'm one of those public servants, and I enjoyed that job. I loved it. But I also knew that there was a lot of problems in that organization. And now I'm not even wondering, I'm wondering if I could even be hired as a Christian that way. Are we prepared as a community to raise funds to help those who will lose their job because they remain faithful Christians? Right? We need someone to do that. Right now, another thing that I'm doing is I'm working with Christian organizations like a Christian art studio in British Columbia, a Christian seniors home in Toronto, even Christian schools all across Alberta, to write their policy so they can protect themselves from harmful legislation. And I'm one of the few people in Canada doing that. We need an organization that does that across the country. And more importantly, and this is what I hope you understand, my dad has a really good principle. He doesn't care if thousands of people follow him. He wants a handful of people who can be cloned by him. And imagine if there's Christians doing my job in every province in the country, en anglais, en français. That will transform the church to be ready for persecution. In fact, I think it's key that the motivation for everything we do is not what Augustine said. This is Augustine's quote, hate the sin but love the sinner. We need to love like this. We have to hate the sin because we love the sinner. And that's why we need to stand. That's why we need to be able to survive persecution. Because the last point that I think it's critical for us to do, to stand on truth, to love like Jesus does, but to be able to share both in everyday conversations. You know, we've already gotten a lot of questions about what are we supposed to do now? What's the practical thing? By the way, that's a good question, because that's what we should be asking. The practical thing is what Jesus did. He created a community whose responsibility it was to love God and to love their neighbors. That's you. And we need to empower you, to give you the tools, to talk to your classmates and coworkers, to talk to the people at the CRTC, who, by the way, are supposed to be regulating the internet. And I can tell you, we can talk about that later, they're not capable of doing that. Okay? And we need to be able to be emboldened to understand that if we can't talk to our neighbors and friends, how in the world can we talk to our MPs? We need an organization that focuses on that. So if you think about the marketplace of ideas in ancient Rome, and I'm almost done. In ancient Rome, the church grew, even though they were the most persecuted. Why? Because they knew how to talk to people. They were not scared of the conversation. Let me ask you, when was the last time you had a spiritual conversation with those around you? When was the last time we got training where you actually went through real life scenarios? Like, what happens if you find gay pornography on your child's phone? What happens when your wife no longer wants to come to church? We should be having those conversations in church so we can learn how to talk about these things. And by the way, that's what we're already doing. We're providing that kind of training. When we think about that future then, I think it's critical for us to begin by asking ourselves some key questions here. What are the issues we need to tackle? Well, one of them is on LGBTQ. It's a hard one, and we're not trying to just attack anybody. Someone was saying, we're not trying to harass people. No, we're not. We need to remember, hate the sin because we love the sinner, right? And this is such a close thing to my heart because when I was in Ottawa leading a Bible study group, I realized I had fallen in love with one of the members of my Bible study group. The problem, it was a men's Bible study group. I had no idea what to do with those attractions. And thankfully, there was a lady who worked at the local intervarsity at Carleton University who gave me a phone number for a Christian counselor who I went to, who helped me keep my faith because he reminded me that sexuality is something you have, it is not something you are, unless you choose to make it so. That act of her giving that phone number is now a criminal act. She could go to jail for 3 years for advertising conversion therapy. That's where we're at. So one of the things we're doing is creating a book where we talk about 5 key assumptions to overcome on LGBTQ conversations. The Met has kindly offered to be my book launch later this year, so hopefully you can come for that. That's the kind of resource we want to continue to create. We also want to be able to do our conference next year. And not just that, for those of you in watch parties, we want to have conferences all across Canada, at least one more in one of those locations for those watch parties. Why? Because the training we're offering isn't about just building people up. I know, I see you, I'm almost done, I promise. It's about building a church that thrives in persecution. And we can't do all of this work unless we have a church that backs us up. And that's why we're asking you to be someone like Pastor Christian Fuhr. If you don't know his story, I'll just briefly say it fast. He was an East German Lutheran pastor who began a prayer meeting when East Germany started. And that prayer meeting grew and grew in the late 80s until they started spilling it on the streets and began to cover the streets. The East German soldiers wanted to shoot at them, but not one of them threw a rock or anything at those German soldiers, to the point where they actually were able to get those German soldiers to join the prayer meeting on the streets and hold the candles they were holding, and the Berlin Wall fell because of a prayer meeting by this pastor. And one of those German officials, he said, we prepared for absolutely everything except prayer and candles. When people ask me, do we as Christians need to get involved in politics? The question that I ask them is, do you not realize you already are? When the government is telling you that you can't pray outside, or you can't counsel your friend, or you can't go to your pastor, there's already all kinds of things the government is doing to get you involved in politics. The question that we need to ask is, do we love our neighbor enough to get involved? Do we love our Lord enough to understand that we have a responsibility to get involved? You know, you have in your booklets there the Cornerstone Institute. That's what we're starting to do this. We want to bring this to Ottawa. We want to bring this training here. And yes, we need support to do that. It's a lot of money we're asking. We're asking for $200,000. But here's the point. I'm not even asking all of you. We ask you all to pray, but I'm asking for that remnant, like Gideon had, who says, this is too critical for us to ignore. I want to be involved with this. And I want you to contact us, talk to us, help us out. We want to make sure we can invest in the next generation and help them know that at the time that God gave us, we were able to be those ambassadors that our culture needs. Let me close in this, and I'll ask Nigel to come up. It was G.K. Chesterton who actually said this, and what an encouragement when we talk about persecution. He says, Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it has a God who knew the way out of the grave. We are a people of resurrection. And even in this time when we have all kinds of situations happening to Christians in public, it is when we commit to be able to talk to those around us that they cannot stop, that resurrection can happen again. Thank you.
Well, there's something to support. If we are in this fight, we are in it all the way, are we not? I mean, do you only give so much of yourselves, your money? This is our identity of who we are that is actually at stake. And Jojo, I just have to say personally, you're doing the right thing. This is what we need this day. Unfortunately, we have to finish the conference as such, but there is now a bonus debate, comments on questions that we've received, in which those of us who have spoken today will gather on the stage. I think this stage is going to be reset with armchairs and drinks and made very comfortable, and we'll have a quick chat about some very deep subjects. But it's my great pleasure to thank you all. I'm not sending you away, I'm inviting you to stay for the session. But please do, and just give us a few moments to get the chair set up. Thank you.